I want to say welcome, everyone, and thank you for joining us tonight for Lowe Connects. I'm Dr. Tola Porter, the Lowe Art Museum's educator for academic and public programs, and I'm delighted to have you with us tonight for this engaging program about photography. Let me cover a few housekeeping items before we get to the good stuff. So first, I have enabled closed captions so that you can see a live transcript if you click on this button on your Zoom. And at the end of the program, we'll have a little bit of time for Q&A, I'm hoping. So if you have a question, go ahead and type it into your chat box, and I'll hold on to those until the end of the program, and we'll hopefully get to be able to get to them. Okay, our spring exhibitions are either opening or coming very, very soon. We have a very beautiful meditative show with works by Mia Angelou. We have, of course, this powerful show of Southern photography you're going to hear about tonight. And soon, a sculptural installation by two Cuban-American artists, Antonia Wright and Ruben Millares, will be open just a few days. So visit our website for more information and come on by. Some exciting upcoming programs. I host a slow looking program next week, and we're going to actually dig into a few photographs from this photography show. We have a family art workshop that is again going to focus on reckonings and reconstructions, and we'll have some wonderful activity with photography. We have two exciting lectures coming. These are our annual lectures. One is based in photography again, and we have Miami's own Anastasia Samoilova, who is an artist that works with the photographic medium. And then at the end of March, we will have Michael Janis, who is a glass artist, come to speak about his practice. So we invite you all. These are free programs, and some of them come with food and drink, so please come by. Finally, I'd like to thank our sponsors with whom we could not create these engaging programs for the public. And so for Reckonings, this exhibition, we'd like to thank the Wyeth Foundation for American Art, the Georgia Museum of Art, the Cowles Charitable Trust, and all of our wonderful Miami cultural institutions that support us culturally, the Miami-Dade County, Florida Arts and Culture, Coral Gables, the Beaux-Arts Foundation, and the wider American Alliance of Museums. So let me introduce our speakers. Richard McCabe was born in England and grew up in the American South. He's a curator of photography and writer based in New Orleans, and since 2010 has been the curator of photography at the Ogden Museum of Southern Art, where he has organized and curated over 30 exhibitions. McCabe received an MFA in studio art from Florida State University, and his photographs have been included in gallery and museum exhibitions throughout the United States, including the Mobile Museum of Art, the A.M. Richard Fine Gallery in Brooklyn, and the Boyd Satellite Gallery in New Orleans. In 2017, his monograph of photography called Landstar was published, and in 2018, he contributed the introductory essay for the publication New Southern Photography, Images of the 21st Century. McCabe's curatorial perspective has been published in the New York Times, Time, and National Public Radio, among others. Caitlin Swindell is the Curator of Collections and Exhibitions at the Lowe Art Museum, University of Miami. Her previous roles include Senior Curatorial Assistant of Modern Contemporary Art at the Denver Art Museum, and Curatorial Assistant at the Museum of Contemporary Art in Jacksonville, where she assisted with dozens of exhibitions and curated several of her own. Caitlin has worked as an art consultant and gallery assistant in Santa Fe, New Mexico, and interned at the Museum of Fine Arts, Boston, as well as the Smithsonian National Portrait Gallery and the New Orleans Museum of Art, which gets to her Southern credentials, which are pretty strong, having grown up in Virginia and having received her BA from Tulane and her MA from UNC Chapel Hill. So Caitlin, with that, I turn the floor to you for your introductory comments.
Thank you, Tola. So I had the great pleasure of working on Reckonings and Reconstructions, Southern Photography from the Do Good Fund here at the Lowe. It's an exhibition that originated at the University of Georgia's Georgia Museum of Art, curated by Jeffrey Richmond Mall, and it encompasses over 100 photographs by 70 artists. and it's a part of the Do Good Fund, which was founded in 2012 by Alan Rothschild, which is a public collection of photographs with more than 800 images in the collection, made to be available for displays at museums, galleries, and other non-traditional art spaces. And so this exhibition traveled to the Chrysler Museum in Norfolk, Virginia, before coming to the Lowe. And it really explores through six main themes how photography can help us understand the South and the region in a broader context. So it's a large-scale survey of many photographs that contend with the past and assert that change must come. And what you're seeing here on this slide is one on the left, the introductory graphic for the exhibition, which borrows the font and style of the originating institution, but we did something different in that we collated and gathered all of the locations that these photographers captured images in. So just kind of to ground you into what constitutes the South. Being in Miami, Florida, it's offered a lot of our guests interesting conversations about what we think about place and how Miami or the state of Florida really fits into that more broadly. And so grounding that here, and then with this image of the kudzu plant, which if you're familiar with it is an over encompassing, fast, quickly growing plant. That was a motif that they incorporated as part of their presentation at UGA. And then also to think about the South. So if you could go to the next slide, Tola. So I loved that when they were thinking about, as they formed the Do Good Fund, how would they define the South? Not to necessarily go by strict parameters of state, but thinking about amorphous shifts of region and cultural shifts. So looking at the Southern Geographer Journal image to the left, from, I believe, the 70s. And then the image at right is a recent iteration of the kudzu growing in 2022. So I think this is a perfect way to start to think about land and the ways that we think of the South and its broader region. Next slide. And then this is, if you've also seen on campus, the banner image for the show, which is always a difficult task to do, to pick something that we feel resonates with the community and that is really evocative of the themes of the exhibition, which Richard will get into more. But those include land, kinship, ritual, food, labor, and law and protest. This image by Peyton Fulford, who's originally from Georgia, she's now based in LA, is part of her series Infinite Tenderness, Becoming One. And so I selected it in part because I think, this series of images focused on portraits of LGBTQ youths and the connection that they have in terms of identity. But I think that just grounding visitors with many students, with young visitors, getting to see in some ways themselves reflected in the photography. So one really exciting element of this exhibition is thinking about how we conceive of the South, whether that's from landscape to industry, to performance, ritual celebrations. But at the heart of the exhibition, I would say, is really a base on portraiture and the varied people across time that you'll see. The earliest photograph in the show is from 1956, and the most recent one is from 2019. So without further ado, I'll let Richard dive into some of the photographs from the show, which he offers such a great perspective, being both a trained curator and fine artist and photographer as well. So thank you so much.
Did you want to talk for a sec about the install shot?
This is just to get us excited. If you haven't been to the show, this is a sampling of the exhibition divided into 6 sections. So as you can see, it's over 100 photographs that definitely deserve a lot of time. So please come and visit us. It's open through May 19th. Yeah, thank you.
Perfect. So Richard, I'll be your switcheroo over here on the slides. You just let me know when you want to advance, and the floor is yours.
Okay, great. Thank you, Tola. Thank you, Caitlin. And I saw the show at its original incarnation at the University of Georgia, at the Georgia Museum of Art, and it's absolutely beautiful. And uh, thanks so much for the introduction. And what I was going to do tonight, basically, is talk about the Reckoning and Reconstructions photography from the Do Good Fund exhibition, and then talk about Pacific photographs as they relate to the six dominant themes within the exhibition. So, next slide, Tola. So, as we talked about earlier, the Jeffrey Richmond Mole, the curator, divided the exhibition into six themes. And he said he was very influenced by the Southern Accent exhibition that originated from the Nasher, which it wasn't like the New Southern Photography exhibition I curated at the Ogden. It wasn't about new emerging photography. It was more about themes within photography. So he divided this exhibition based on land, labor, law and protest, food, ritual, and kinship. So we'll look at a couple photographs from each one of these themes, and I'll talk a little bit about the photograph itself, what it is of, and what I think it is about. And it might not be what it's really about, but this is a subjective view of what I think it's about. And then we'll talk about the photographer a little bit, maybe try to put his work into context. And so the first slide, Tola, thank you, is the first theme is land. And this is Mike Smith, photographer. The photograph is Gray, Tennessee, and it was made in 1996. Mike Smith's photographic practice is within the documentary and street photography tradition. His work focuses on the culture and the landscape of Appalachia. He's originally from the Northeast, I believe around Boston. And in 1981, he got the job as a professor of photography at East Tennessee State University in Johnson City, Tennessee. So he moved down to Tennessee. He still views himself as an outsider, although he's been photographing the region for over 40 years. But this image here is of a plowed field. I guess I originally thought it was a small farm. Now I think it might be a background garden just because of the development that's been happening in Appalachia, and it's really changing Appalachia, and that a lot of folks are now buying vacation homes up there. So it used to be coal mining, and that was the main threat to the landscape there. Now it's development, and everybody wants a vacation home up there. But what I love about Mike Smith's work is that it's not nostalgic. It deals with reality, and at the same time, it deals with the myth and legends of Appalachia. He deals with the past and the present, the rural, the urban, and now the suburban. There's a strong sense of place in his work. It's visual. This image is visually interesting. I think what draws me to is just the swooping rhythm of the picture of the plowed field in the foreground, and then against the very feminine curve of the hillside in the background. Mike Smith has an MFA from Yale, where he studied, and he's a Guggenheim Fellow. And I have to say that within the context of this exhibition, there are three photographers, and I'll talk about two of them tonight. Mike Smith, one, but there's three photographers, and they all have a few things in common. They went to Yale, and they teach around this area of Tennessee, Georgia, and they both won Guggenheim's fellows. And Mike Smith was one. The other is Baldwin Lee, who I'll talk about later in this talk. And the other one is Mark Steinmetz, who studied at Yale, went down to uh, East Tennessee State University adjunct with Mike Smith, and made photographs around that area in the 80s and 90s. Both of them work in the street, all of them work in the street tradition. They're all in the documentary tradition. And anyway, it's a really great connection with Yale and Guggenheim and the South and the Do Good Fund collection. So the next photograph is by, in the land theme, is by Celestia Morgan. And the photograph is My Court 2013. Celestia Morgan's practice uses self-portraiture to construct imagery based on memory and life experiences growing up in Birmingham, Alabama. She uses self-portraiture, and I call this kind of work constructed realities, meaning that the photographers construct the work, they construct the narrative. They're not made in the real world. Well, I had that conversation with Ramel Ross. I'm like, Ramel, your work's not made in the real world. you construct these images. He's like, no, no, they are the real world. And he's right. It is the real world, but they're constructed with a narrative that the through the direction of the photographer. So when you look at work like this, and that's Celestia in the photograph, it's self-portraiture. Um, and so you think about people like Carrie Mae Weems, excuse me, and Cindy Sherman, of course, and then other ones in the constructed reality category with people like Ramel Ross, who collaborates with the people he photographs. The most famous would maybe be Jeff Wall from Vancouver and the Gregory Crutzen. Um, so self-portraiture within Celestia's work, she photographs herself in the place in which she grew up and continues to live. And the place she grew up is a neighborhood in Birmingham that's been decimated by redlining, which is a discriminatory zoning practice that isolates African American communities within Birmingham and throughout the US. And a good example of redlining through the government was the US highway system, which basically divided cities based on racial lines and would isolate um, different communities, usually communities of color. So within this photograph, Celestia is looking defiant. Her back is to the camera. She's not revealing her face to the camera. This photograph depicts a personal landmark, a basketball court. I'm not sure exactly what this meant to her, if she played basketball there, if her brothers played basketball there. I think it's really interesting that she has her foot on the basketball, like she's stopping the action. And it's an urban landscape. It deals with memory, history, and identity. There's a strong sense of place, which is a um, major theme in Southern art. And Celestia was born and raised in Birmingham. She's now the professor of art and photography at the University of Alabama. She got her BFA at University of Alabama, Birmingham, which is a really incredible photography school. There's a lot of great photographers come out of University of Alabama, Birmingham, Celestia being one. And then she got her MFA in photography at University of Alabama. Okay, next slide, Tola, please. Now we move to the theme of labor. And this photograph is by Paul Kowalski. The title of the photograph is Alberta Crate and Box Company. It was made in 1981. Kowalski's practice is within the documentary tradition, social documentary tradition. He's a self-taught photographer. For over 40 years, he dedicated himself to photographing his hometown of Bainbridge, Georgia, and the surrounding county, which is Decatur, Georgia. He is the greatest photographer you've never heard of. And that's a quote from Bill Boylan from Fall Line Press. And I truly believe that his work is absolutely stunning. He ran a hardware store in Georgia, his parents' hardware store for about 20 years, and he closed the hardware store in 1975 to dedicate himself to photography. And I think being a merchant and working with people of all races, he was very empathetic to the people he photographed. So in this portrait, and Kowalski would photograph everything. He would go in the grocery stores and make photographs. He would go in the cemeteries and make photographs. He would photograph in the city park. He would go to the swimming holes. No subject was too insignificant for Paul Kowalski. And I think all photographers and all students of photography need to look at this work because they could never say, I don't know what to photograph. Just look at Paul Kowalski. He would photograph anything and he would make incredible images of that. And what I love about this picture is this is made in a box factory in a dark, dank, noisy factory in Bainbridge, Georgia. And it's such a dignified portrait. This woman is dressed in white, which is denotes purity and cleanliness. I can hear the sounds and the smells of this factory in this picture. If you look to her left, you see that spinning wheel. That's the factory. That's a wheel in the factory spinning. And you look at her hand, she's holding onto the railing of a guardrail there in the factory. So she's holding herself still. This is a long exposure. It's probably a 15th of a second, eighth of a second. It's an amazing picture made in this place. And I just love her look. She's looking up at the heavens. A shaft of light is coming through the skylight, casting across her body. And it's just a beautiful, dignified, compassionate portrait. Paul Koleski was born in Bainbridge, Georgia. He studied literature at Emory University, which I tell you, the best photographers studied literature. Paul Koleski, Walker Evans. If you can read and write, you can take pictures. And Paul Koleski is an example of that. He was a Guggenheim Fellow as well, and he had two books. He had several books, but two of them were uh, Understandings, Photographs from Decatur County, Georgia, which was published in 1981. And the last book that was published posthumously by Center for Documentary Studies at Duke was called One Place, Paul Koleski in 4 Decades of Photographs from Decatur County, Georgia. Next slide, please, Tola. This photograph is within the labor theme, and it's by Carl Martin. It's called Men in a Car, 1996 to 1998. Carl's photographic practice explores street photography, documentary photography, and constructed imagery, as well as collaboration. This photograph is from his Public Gesture series, which documented how human beings interact with architecture and the landscape within public space. Now, Carl is an architect in Athens, Georgia, and he's also a photographer. So he loves the way he intersplices his two passions there within his photography. And within his photography, he asks the people that he collaborates with, how does photography, excuse me, how does architecture move you feel? How does your body move within this space? Uh, how does your body, public gesture, move within the space, the built environment? He collaborates with the people he photographs. And of course, you might be asking, well, why is this picture about labor? Well, I think it's labor because when I look at this picture, I think these guys are going to work. So going to work is part of being, to me, it's just as stressful as work. So I don't know how it is with y'all, but so when I look at this picture, I'm like, these guys are going to work, and not to stereotype. They're wearing truckers hats, jean jackets. They look like blue collar workers. So they're going to work in the morning, driving together, carpooling to work. I can tell this is the morning by the lighting in the photograph, the early morning light, the golden light, the magic hour of the morning. And what I love about this picture, there's an element of humor within it because I'm looking at these guys in the car and they're looking directly at Carl making their picture, and I can hear the guy in the back seat saying, "Hey, see that guy over there? He's taking our picture." And the guy in the front seat driving, he's like, "Yeah, they sure are." And the guy in the passenger seat, front seat's like, "I wonder why he's taking our picture." So anyway, it's just got this element of humor with it that I really love. And also there's a little signifier in the background, which is the transformer, which I think is a signifier for or a metaphor for the power of photography and the power of perception of the perception, photographer and subject relationship. And Carl was born in Athens, Alabama. He studied at the School of Visual Arts. And then he lived in New York in the 80s. And in 1990, he moved down to Athens, Georgia. He too is a Guggenheim Fellow. And in 2018, Fall Line Press published his book called Carl Martin. And he's a wonderful photographer. Check him out. Next slide, please, Tola. So the next theme within the context of this exhibition is law and protest. And this is a photograph by Rudy Roy, and it's called Shack Up In 2014. Rudy Roy's practice is within the documentary tradition and photojournalism. Um, Excuse me, I got my notes wrong. Um, he's a concerned photographer, as Cornel Kappa would say, the founder of the International Center of Photography. This photo is made from his Living is a Protest series, and it's based on the Hands Up, Don't Shoot uh, protests during the Michael Brown and Eric Garner shootings by police in 2014. So the story behind this photograph is, now I know what the Shack Up Inn is. It's outside of Clarksdale, Mississippi. I like it a lot. I've stayed there many times. What it is, it's a bunch of tenant shacks they brought from the countryside of Mississippi, and they put them in one place. There's like 30 shacks. You can rent them. It's like a bed and breakfast. They have blues festivals there. They have juke joint festivals there, and it's on a cotton plantation. So Rudy Roy was there in the cotton field meditating, and this young man who works at the shack up in, his name's Robert, walked up to Rudy and said, "Hey, what are you doing?" He's like, "Well, I'm just meditating." And they started a conversation. And Rudy asked him if he knew who Michael Brown and Eric Garner was, and he did. And he raised his hand into the uh, hands up, don't shoot protest, and he made this photograph. So that's the basis behind the photograph. Um, Royce's photographs speak to the human condition. He has photographed the aftermath of Hurricane Katrina. He photographed the Black Lives Matter protest movement and chronic homelessness in the US. Now it's interesting, his gallery in Paris, just a little factoid here, sent me a PDF of his catalog. I guess he has a show there now in Paris. And they titled this photograph A Humanist's Eye. So that I thought that was interesting that was a different title to it. Rudy Roy was born in Jamaica. He's based in Brooklyn. His work is featured in a documentary called Through a Lens Darkly, Black Photographers and the Emergence of a People. In 2016, Time magazine called Rudy Roy the Instagram Photographer of the Year. So follow him on Instagram. The next photograph in the law and protest theme is by Gordon Parks, and the name of the photograph is Outside Looking In. It was made in Mobile, Alabama in 1956. Gordon Parks' photography practice deals with documentary and photojournalism. It's based in documentary and photojournalism. He started out as a fashion photographer, which is really interesting, and then went into documentary and photojournalism. He calls photography his weapon of choice. He uses photography in a struggle against racism and segregation. This was during the 1950s and 60s. The photograph Outside Looking In, Mobile, Alabama, is from a Life magazine photo essay he did in 1956 called The Restraints Open and Hidden was the name of the article. And in this photograph, you can see the restraints are vividly portrayed in this photograph. It's the fence that's keeping the Black children out of the segregated playground. And in the background is white children playing on a well manicured lawn in the playground, as the Black children in the foreground are kept out looking through a fence while they stand in a weeded area. The hidden restraints are not visible, but that's the codified law, segregation and Jim Crow laws. In September 1956, Life published this article called "The Restraints Open and Hidden," and in which Gordon Parks followed families in Mobile and photographed. And then there was 26 photographs that were published in the original article. The rest of the photographs were thought to be lost. 5 years after Gordon Parks died in 2011, the Gordon Parks Foundation found a box titled Segregation Series, in which they found over 70 films transparencies from the Segregation Series, originally for the Life magazine article. And then the book, The Segregation Story, was published by Steidl in 2014. So this work came to light, the whole body of work, in 2014 when it was published by the leading photography book publisher Steidl in Germany. Like I said, Gordon Parks began his career as a fashion photographer. He ended up working for the FSA and the OIW, Office of War Information under Roy Stryker during World War II. He became a fashion photographer for Vogue in 1944, and he became a staff photographer for Life magazine in 1948. He was also a filmmaker his films include Shaft and Leadbelly, which I did not know he directed Shaft, which is pretty incredible. So next slide, please. Tola, I have to take a little drink here. This is under the food theme of food, and this is one of my favorite photographers in the world. This is Susan Worsham, and the photograph is titled Margaret's Rhubarb 2010. Susan's practice is within the documentary tradition. She also constructs her imagery, and collaboration is a big part of her photographs. Margaret's Rhubarb is from the Bittersweet on Bostwick Lane series, which explores grief of Susan losing both her parents of an untimely death and her brother's suicide. This is a beautiful still life that is photographed using just window light. And the photograph is of Margaret's hands, and the rhubarb and plums that Margaret grew in her garden in Richmond, Virginia. There's a tenderness and fragility in this photograph. Food and plants are metaphors within Susan's art. Food is the giver of life. Plants die in the winter and come back every spring as a form of reincarnation and rejuvenation. Susan uses her art as a way, as a sense, as a sense to get a sense to make sense of the world and to channel her grief and find solace within art. Margaret is Susan's oldest neighbor, and she's her connection to Bostwick Lane. Margaret was a link to Susan's parents and to her brother. Margaret represents stability in Susan's life, and Margaret, the tale behind Margaret is she was Susan's neighbor on Bostwick Lane, and Margaret baked a loaf of bread. Susan's brother was in a terrible motorcycle accident and was paralyzed, and Margaret baked a loaf of bread and took it up to her Susan's brother. Her brother ate the loaf of bread, then committed suicide. So Margaret told Susan that story while Susan was making a photograph of her. So, and to hear Susan speak about it, it's so moving. And if you know Susan, you'll love her photographs even more when she speaks about it. Susan was born and raised in Richmond, Virginia. She still lives in Richmond. She works at a restaurant called Opossum. If you ever go to Richmond, go to Opossum restaurant. It's amazing. In the early 2000s, she lived in Miami. She was a fashion assistant and fashion photography in Miami in the early 2000s. She's in the collection of the Ogden Museum of Southern Art and the Virginia Museum of Fine Arts in Richmond. The next slide, please, Tola. Under the food theme, once again, this is Carolyn Drake, and the title of this photograph is Deviled Eggs 2017. And Carolyn Drake's photographic practice explores the documentary tradition and collaboration to produce constructed photographs. Deviled Eggs is from Drake's series called Knit Club, which was a several-year-long collaboration with a group of women that Drake met while living in Water Valley, Mississippi. So her practice embraces collaboration. She melds photography, sewing, collage, and sculpture in her work. What I love about this picture is it's a beautiful still life. It's Technicolor. It looks like it came out of The Wizard of Oz. It's very unworldly. It's mysterious. It's Gothic in style. It's labored in symbolism, and it resists interpretation. In 2020, These Birds Walk publishers in Oakland, California, published Carolyn Drake's book, Knit Club. And what Knit Club does is it offers a different perspective on female life in the South, and it's from the gaze of a woman. It negates the male gaze. The pictures are constructed. It's a really Southern Gothic tale. Beautiful, beautiful book. If you get a chance, if you've ever seen it. And she's very influenced by the writer William Faulkner. And Drake was born in California. She still lives in California, and she studied media and culture at Brown University in the early 90s. And her practice is built around these long-term projects. And her latest book is about masculinity and male nude. So she's gone the complete opposite direction of the series, which explored uh, these group of female knitters in the Water Valley, Mississippi. It's a really wonderful book, and the photographs are absolutely gorgeous. The next slide there, Cole. Thank you. So now we move on to ritual. And this is Jerry Siegel, and it's Homecoming, Selma, Alabama, 2013. Jerry's photographic practice is within the documentary tradition and portraiture. His work investigates the Black Belt region of Alabama where he grew up. He grew up in Selma. He now lives in Atlanta, and he still has a house in Selma, his family house in Selma. So he goes back from Atlanta to Selma and photographs. This photograph is from his Black Belt Color series, and there's an incredible sense of place once again in this photograph and personal history of him growing up in uh, Selma. And of course, ritual in the American South, football is a religion. I grew up in Alabama. I was indoctrinated at a young age. I love football. And here you have high school football halftime. You have the pageantry of what looks like a prom, and it's a rite of passage, playing sports and debutante balls. And what I love about this photograph is the balance is just absolutely perfect balance in this photograph. You look at first of all, this woman in the center, young woman, is standing right on the 50-yard line, middle of the field. There's a chalk line that leads your eye directly to her. She's flanked on either side by three women and their dates, three young women and their dates. So there's seven in the photograph total, seven figures, which is a cosmic number in itself. So it's just the perfect order and composition, and it captures the ritual of halftime in high school football, which is Friday Night Lights, as you know, in the South. It's a big deal. Jerry Siegel was born in Selma. He lives and works in Atlanta. He began, like I said, he began as a commercial photographer. Then in early 2000s, he shifted to fine art photography. His two books are Black Belt Color, which this photograph is from. And then he has another book of portraitures called Facing South, Portraits of Southern Artists, which is really wonderful as well. Next slide, please, Tola. Next to football, another ritual in the South, of course, is in the rural South is hunting. And this photograph is by Maud Schuyler Clay. It's called Delta Hunters, 1994. Maud's practice is within the documentary tradition and portraiture. In this photograph, she captures the hunting culture of the South. And what I love about this picture, again, the perfect balance. You have the tree, that big dead tree in the background. It's winter time. You have this beautiful tree that's dividing the frame vertically. Then you have the horizon line that's dividing the frame horizontally. And so you have the rule of thirds in action here, guys. And you have the left of the tree, you have the right of the tree, and you have the horizon line dividing the picture. It's perfect composition. And in the foreground, you have these hunters and in this beautiful pose, kind of circular motion that they're creating with the body gestures. They're obviously rabbit hunting because the one guy has a rabbit that he has shot. And I think in the catalog, in the exhibition, they actually have this photograph under the food category, which I can see that too. It's definitely food. So this photograph deals with, hunting, subsistence on the land, food, and then African American hunters. When you think about hunting in the South, most people think about, you know, white men and pickup trucks with gun racks in the back. But in the rural South, Black folks hunting is very big as well. So in the Mississippi Delta, hunting is so much land up there, and hunting is a big deal. I grew up in Alabama, and hunting was a big deal there too. So Maud was born in Greenwood, Mississippi. She attended the University of Mississippi. Then she went on to the Mississippi Academy of Arts. She was an assistant to her cousin, the father of color photography, William Eggleston, for a while. And then she went to New York after she graduated, and she worked as a photo editor for Esquire, Fortune magazine, and Vanity Fair. In 1987, she returned to Mississippi Delta to raise a family. Her books include Delta Land, Delta Dogs, which were in black and white, and then this body of work, which became known as Mississippi History, which was published in a book by Steidl, I believe it was 2018. And Mississippi History is her color portraits made in Mississippi from 1987 onward. She's in the collection of the Museum of Modern Art, Museum of Fine Arts Houston, and the Ogden Museum of Southern Art. Next slide, please, Tola. Also under ritual, we have El Kasimu Harris, Come Tuesday, Sportsman Corner 2018. And El Kasimu Harris photography practices within the documentary tradition and photojournalism. This photograph, Come Tuesday, of course, that's Fat Tuesday. That's Mardi Gras here in New Orleans. So he's documenting Mardi Gras culture, Mardi Gras Indian culture. Mardi Gras Indian culture is a homage to Native Americans who took in runaway slaves and welcomed them into their tribes. So the Mardi Gras Indians, they spend all year making their suits. They sew their suits themselves. The beadwork is a homage to African American and Haitian beadwork traditions and Native American traditions. And this photograph is from Kasimu's series called Vanishing Black Bars and Lounges, where he's documenting these bars in New Orleans that are being closed. COVID didn't help. COVID closed a lot of them. A lot of them are victims of gentrification and white hipsters taking over. And so he's documenting these black spaces, bars where, the comfort of camaraderie within the African American community. And it's a beautiful series. He's shown it at a few museums around the country. Just had a show at the Hilliard in Lafayette. He's going to be in Prospect 6 exhibition, the triennial here in New Orleans next year, I think at the Ogden. I hope he is. Kasimu, who is also the best dressed man in New Orleans, is a photographer and writer. He started as a journalist, studied journalism at the University of Mississippi. He told me that Hurricane Katrina, made him a photographer. It was after Katrina that he picked up a camera. I remember him coming to me in like 2010 and saying, "Richard, how do you do this photography thing?" And so now, and what is it? 14 years later, he's photographing for the New York Times, and he's doing amazing work. He also writes for the Bitter Southerner. He wrote an essay for the exhibition I curated, New Southern Photography. His essay was called Dismantling of Southern Photography. When he praised the diversity and inclusion that was within the New Southern Photography exhibition. And he's a wonderful photographer and he's doing great work. And I love the joy within this photograph. It captures the spirit of Mardi Gras, the movement. I can hear the sounds of the musicians playing in this bar, and it's just a wonderful image. Next.
Great. I'll just remind you that we only have a few images left, but just take note of the time.
Okay, am I running out of time?
Not yet. Not yet.
Okay, we only have two more. I'll be really quick.
Exactly.
And then mine. Okay, sorry. Kinship. This is Baldwin Lee. Children Holding Hands, Vicksburg, Mississippi, 1984. Baldwin Lee's practices within the documentary tradition and collaboration. This is a very compassionate photograph, ethereal lighting. I love the children holding hands. It's very sweet. These children could be brothers and sisters. Baldwin collaborates with his subject. He will ask them, he will pose them, he will direct them within his poses. Baldwin was born in Brooklyn. He grew up in the Chinatown, Manhattan's Chinatown. He got an MFA from Yale University, and he was the last student to study with Walker Evans, and he was Walker Evans' assistant and printed for Walker Evans in 1974. He became the first director of the photography department at the University of Tennessee in 1982. In 1983, he ventured out from Knoxville with a 4x5 view camera. And for the next 7 years, he traveled the back roads of the South and made nearly 10,000 photographs documenting. He first started out documenting the routes that Walker Evans took in the South in the 40s and, excuse me, 30s and 40s. And then he got really interested in the African American community, and he started pointing his lens more towards the African American community and photographing folks in their houses and on the street and at play, and just made this incredible body of work that's now become a book that was just published by Hunters Point Press called Baldwin Lee. It was published in 2022. The first edition sold out in less than a month. It's already in its third edition. And this fall, we will feature Baldwin Lee in a solo exhibition here at the Ogden Museum of Southern Art. The work is absolutely amazing, and it really encapsulates the Reagan era America. So it's all black and white and just beautifully done. And then next one, in kinship, we have Bill Yates. Untitled 34/3, 1973. Bill Yates is works within the documentary tradition and street photography. The title 34/3 indicates the roll of film, the 34th roll that he photographed on this project, and the exposure was number 3 on the 34th roll, hence 34-3. This was student work that he did at the University of South Florida. He spent 6 months documenting the kids at the Sweetheart roller skating rink. This was a roller skating rink outside of Tampa, Florida that he photographed. So he would go there on the weekends with his big flash and he would make these photographs. And it just really captured the gestalt of the 1970s boyfriends, girlfriends, sex, drugs, and rock and roll. And these kids were from blue collar families, sons and daughters. There's a rumor they could have been the sons and daughters of carnies or circus workers of the Ringling Brothers Barnabelli Circus. I don't know if that's just an urban myth. I'll have to ask Bill about that. But Bill was born in Jacksonville. He got a BA at University of South Florida and an MFA from Rhode Island School of Design, where he studied with Harry Callahan, Aaron Siskin, and Gary Winogrand, one of the fathers of street photography in the 1970s. Next slide. So I was asked to show a couple of my pieces because I am in the Do Good Fund collection. I appreciate it, Caitlin and Tola, for asking me to do that. And I'll be very brief. This photograph's Jackson, Mississippi, 2015. It's from a book of photographs I did called Landstar, and Landstar stands for Edwin Land, and the land camera, the Polaroid land camera, and star being the sun, which illuminated all these pictures. I spent about 4 years traveling the back roads of the South, kind of photographing the vanishing vernacular architecture. This is a abandoned gas station in Jackson, Mississippi. I was very influenced by my dad when he was in college, had 6 kids. He went back to get his PhD. He would travel and I would travel with him. He was a traveling salesman and he would sell motor oil to these gas stations in small towns across Alabama, and I would go with them. So I've made a lot of these pictures with a 1936 road map of Florida, which I would drive around Florida with and just make these photographs. And the next one is Selma, Alabama. When I was in Selma, I was just stumbled across this building and I couldn't believe it. I was like, this looks like an architectural model. It was so unique looking there in the landscape. And I love the red of the building, the blocked out windows, the blue of the sky, and the green of the grass. I took this picture and I showed it to Jerry Siegel, who's from Selma. And he's like, oh, that's an armory. That's where they made, cannons during the Civil War, which was pretty ironic because next door to the Ogden is the Civil War Museum, and there's a cannon out front that was made at this armory here in Selma. But it was just a very stunning architecture. And I used architecture kind of as a metaphor for the human condition in a lot of these places that I photographed. And that concludes my talk. If y'all have any questions, please ask. Hope you enjoyed it.
Fantastic,
Thank you so
Richard.
much.
Thank you so much. Folks, now is the time to type into the chat if you have a question. And one pops to my mind, which I can ask as folks might be typing in some questions. We've established these 6 categories that came sort of with the show. And Richard, and also Caitlin, is there another category that you would add that isn't that isn't that isn't in the original 6? Is there anything else that you would bring into the discussion?
You want to go first, Caitlin?
I don't know. That's a difficult
Yeah.
question.
Well, I would start with this. I mean, for me, it's architecture.
Oh, really? That's good. That's good.
Yeah, and I know that that's in William Christenberry's work and
Yeah.
other photographers' work, and obviously yours, Richard. These structures.
Yeah, yeah, that's great. Because I thought about, land, uh,
Mm-hmm.
in the categories, and I thought, well, what would I put this in? And I didn't know what to put it in.
Mm.
Mm-hmm.
God, it's like, was this land or is this it's definitely not food, it's ritual, I don't know. But
Mhm,
yeah, that's a good one there. You know,
That built environment, architecture,
mhm,
Mm.
definitely.
Yeah, and there's things that aren't photographable, but like myth, and
Mm-hmm.
the South is
yeah.
more of an idea sometimes I think of as a physical place. So, a lot of the things I talked about was the mythology of a place. I actually did a show called The Mythology of Florida that I really one of the best my favorite shows I ever did, but yeah, it's just a lot of things are kind of invisible that you know but resonate, visually. So that makes any sense. But
Yeah, that's
I
a
love
great
the
question.
idea. Yeah,
Yeah.
I love the idea of mythology too. Maybe we'll add two categories. Kaylin, and maybe I'll have the last question for you because we are coming close to time, and so far we haven't gotten anything typed in yet. Anything else you'd say about this show, the experience of curating it, the experience of living with it now? You know, many people have come to tour the show. You've walked them many different
Yeah.
groups through.
Well, I just love it because of the photographic medium. And I talk about it a lot because we're so inundated with images on our phones and like quick viewing of photographs on a daily basis, that any opportunity to really linger with the images and to see what resonates for different people, whether that's across sections or just what sticks out. Because the longer that we look at a photograph, which I hope we've gotten to do today in this lecture, and seeing the different details, thinking about it as there much intention, right? And how these are composed, how these are thought out. In many cases, getting to know some of the sitters of the portraits, and the individual stories is what's really exciting, I think. So that's been a joy to get to see also people tour through the show, and make connections to either various places or something that reminds them about their past, and their own, recollections of the South. That's another R word, right? Reckonings,
mm,
reconstructions, recollections.
mhm.
So yeah, what a
Great. I have a question from the audience. As a photographer, Richard, do you ever revisit sites where you've worked before? And what about your colleagues who are photographers as well?
Yes, I do. There's I tried, I love what Chris Simberry did with his vernacular buildings where he'd revisit them every year and photograph them in sequence, and then they would put them in grids on the wall, and you'd have this sequence of 20 photographs of, the Palmist House or the Green Warehouse or, the Barbecue Inn. So I've done that with a few buildings, but I do like to revisit them. And one of the things about this series I did, I used the camera as a tool. I thought of the camera as a tool of preservation because a lot of these things, even though they're already gone, after I after since I photographed them, and that's what I thought was so amazing about Walker Evans is that he saw you know, the extraordinary and the ordinary, where he was photographing just vernacular sculptures and structures in the South that people didn't think of anything of. He'd photograph a plantation building at the same time that, everybody thought, oh, this is the pinnacle of architecture. But, these square buildings in Alabama that have these weird shapes that mimic the landscape, he would document. And I thank people like that for doing that, because if they didn't do it, we wouldn't have known what it looked like back then. So, yeah, I do revisit places all the time and other photographers too. So.
Fabulous. Any final thoughts? What did it feel like to talk about photography for 35 minutes?
It went really quick. I mean, I
Yeah,
hope I
it
wasn't like
does.
speed reading there. It's easier when I have an audience. It's really hard to practice.
Yeah,
But I really enjoyed it, and yeah, I really appreciate this opportunity. And the Do Good Fund is lives up to its name. It's done such wonderful things for so many photographers. I use it as a reference myself as a curator. I You know, I talk to Alan Rothschild all the time, the founder of Do Good Fund. He tells me about photographers I need to see. I tell him about photographers he needs to see. So it's just a great resource out there. And they've just built this incredible collection. Like you said, Caitlin, like I believe it's around 800 photographs now. And I think they started in 2010,
2012. Yeah.
2012. Yeah. So
hmm
that's 11 years.
hmm
And they've really expanded the depth and breadth of the collection. It's very inclusive and, it's up to date. And
hmm
so they've really done a good job of kind of keeping their finger on the pulse of what's happening in contemporary photography. And so hats off to them. I really love what they do.
wonderful.
Thank
Thank
you.
you, everybody, so much for tonight. And the recording of this evening's talk will be put up on the Lowe Art Museum's YouTube page. And look for an email from us to fill out a survey if you have time. And several people are saying, thank you, great talk. Really enjoyed Richard's
Great.
storytelling, so that's super. All right, folks, have a great night. Thank you again.
You.
Thanks,
Have a
y'all.
good
Bye
night.
bye.